Hello, all, and welcome. Our Coaching for Transformation series continues our new segment on regenerative leadership. I am Dario Minaya, and I'm here with Susan Minaya, Executive Coach, Leadership Strategist, and Learning and Development Expert. Now, last week we began our series on regenerative leadership, why it matters today. Now, we talked about what regenerative leadership is, where the idea comes from, and how it expands the leadership conversation beyond individual effectiveness toward collective capacity and sustainable impact. Today, we are going to talk about why this model matters now. Stay tuned to learn more. Susan, we are back again.
Hi, Dario.
So let's kick it off. Why is regenerative leadership especially relevant in this moment?
Because the world that our leaders are leading in has changed, right? We talked about that in the last segment. Regenerative leadership is not just about an interesting concept or a new name for a leadership development program. It is a response to conditions, right, that leaders are actually facing today in the workforce. And organizations are dealing with constant change, workforce strain, technology disruptions, cultural pressures. Just think about it, rising expectations from employees, customers, it's coming from everywhere, community and stakeholders. And at the same time, our leaders are tired. They're trying to carry complexity that was never meant to be carried by one person alone. And that's one of the reasons regenerative leadership matters so much right now. It challenges us to look at the way leadership is happening inside the organization. And it also allows us the opportunity to ask whether, are we building capacity around leaders or are we simply adding more pressure?
This is not about a different leadership style. It is about different leadership context.
Yes, exactly. For a long time, leadership development, as you know, has been focused mostly on helping individual leaders become more effective.
Yeah.
And that still matters. It's still really important. I'm not saying it's not. Leaders still need all of the things that they learned about to build their own personal leadership capability. But the context around leadership has to become more complex. A staffing issue is rarely just a staffing issue anymore. It's going to be coming from maybe a cultural issue, a workload issue, a technology issue. You know how I feel about systems thinking, and this is exactly that moment, right? So we have a change initiative that may affect operations. And like you look at all the tentacles in every little thing that we do, whatever we're trying to transform as an organization. You can't be a siloed person or one individual that's managing all that. So when we develop leaders only as individuals, we might strengthen that one person, but we leave the larger system unchanged, right? And then that leader goes back to the same environment. Hey, they might be really inspired. They might love the new language. They have new tools. But if the system still rewards speed over reflection or urgency over learning, output over sustainable capacity, it becomes very difficult for that leader to lead differently and they fall into old habits.
Yeah, I agree. The leader may grow, but the system keeps pulling them back into the same patterns.
And I think many leaders know that feeling. Listen, they may have the intention and even the skills to lead differently, but if the system around them keeps producing overload, fragmentation, and depletion, well, that's a problem. And that's why regenerative leadership asks a broader question. It's not only asking, how do we develop better individual leaders? It's also asking, what kind of leadership development are we creating? Are we building shared capacity? Are we strengthening our system? Are we helping people participate in leadership rather than waiting for one person to carry everything? That's a very different conversation.
Now, you use the word depletion, and that feels important in this conversation to me.
It totally is, especially when we're talking about regenerative leadership, right? I want to be careful because this is not about blaming leaders, okay? So leaders haven't done things wrong. Most leaders I work with are so deeply committed. They care about their teams. They care about the work and the job that they do. But so many of them are operating inside systems that are asking them to absorb more and more pressure every single day. So we praise leaders for being resilient and reward them for that. But sometimes resilience becomes the expectation that they should just keep carrying these unsustainable demands. That's why burnout is at an all-time high right now. We ask leaders to drive results, right? But sometimes the way those results are achieved leaves people exhausted, right? Yeah, so we met the number, but we have a lot of dead bodies in our wake, right? So it causes people around us to be depleted.
So the issue is not performance itself. It is what the way we pursue performance is doing to the system.
Regenerative leadership invites us to notice the patterns that are happening around us, right? That are causing the depletion or the burnout or the things like that. It asks leaders and organizations to look not only at what's accomplished, but what was strengthened or weakened in the process? Because if the way we lead produces results, but today leaves the system less healthy tomorrow, then we have to ask whether we're truly building sustainable performance. And that is not a soft question. That's a very real leadership question.
And this brings us to collective leadership. You have talked before about that shift from I to we. So, how does collective leadership fit into regenerative leadership?
Collective leadership, Dario, is central because complexity cannot rest on the shoulders of one leader. In our polycrisis world that we live in, when organizations rely too heavily on leaders individually, even the most talented ones, they create pressure points. Like we talked about in the last episode, those organizations that were no longer being all that successful, right? And when too much leadership centers around one person, the whole system starts to slow down. So decisions wait for that person. People look to them for energy and direction. Then they're burnout, and they can't move without them. So how do you create a fluidity throughout the organization so that they can all contribute to the solution? Otherwise the leader becomes the center of everything, and that can look effective for a while, especially if the leader's strong, but over time it's really going to deplete the leader, and it's going to weaken the team and the organization.
Yeah, because the team does not build its own capacity.
Exactly. And if people are always waiting for the leader to decide or give them the answer, I mean, this is something that's just a little crazy sometimes to see, but it happens all the time. Collective leadership does not mean that everyone is in charge of everything. It means leadership capacity is distributed more intentionally across the system. People understand the purpose. They understand how decisions are made. They know where they have to ownership and where they don't, and they can contribute judgments in their input, and they also can hold others accountable for the work. And that reduces the burden on one individual leader, and it strengthens the whole system.
So, collective leadership is not just a nice idea, it is a way to prevent depletion.
Yeah, and that's the point I would really like to emphasize here. Collective leadership helps ensure that we're not asking individual leaders to carry the full weight of the complexity by themselves. When leadership is shared, more people are thinking, we have more diversity of thought, more people learn, more people are taking ownership, and more people are able to help chip in and respond. That's regenerative because it creates capacity rather than consuming it.
Now, some people may hear regenerative or collective and assume this is soft.
Yeah,
So,
could be.
how do you connect this to business performance?
Well, I would say it directly is connected to business performance, because when an organization is depleted, it's going to look productive for a little while, and then numbers might look okay, and then everything's still going on and work gets done. But underneath the surface, you start to see the cost. Regenerative leadership is not simply an aspirational philosophy, it is measurable. Organizations can evaluate its impact by assessing leadership capabilities. What is the organizational culture, right? Talent outcomes, organizational effectiveness, long-term business performance. This is where regenerative leadership will really show up.
So, this is really about the conditions underneath performance.
Yeah, and that's where I think it becomes such an important conversation for business leaders, because performance doesn't happen in a vacuum. People make things happen, right? Our relationships with other people make things smoother when we work together, that systems thinking and the energy, the trust, which is always there, right? Think about it. The speed of trust, the 5 behaviors, the foundational is the trust, right? Is so important. But also it's about capacity. What is the capacity that people have to be able to be effective? And when those things are healthy, performance has a stronger foundation. And when they're depleted, it's more fragile. So regenerative leadership helps leaders pay attention to that foundation. That's one of the things that they really learn, how to focus on that, and it's not soft, it's strategic.
So, when you think about the larger environment leaders are operating in today, what makes this especially urgent?
Mostly it's the pace and complexity of change, Dario, that they're forced to deal with. Think about with AI, how it's reshaping the way work gets done at this velocity that's almost mind-blowing. You can't even keep up with it, right? New expectations all around for the way work gets done, how employees show up, what are they actually doing now instead of AI doing it. There's managing the risk, there's a cost, there's a cultural impact, and then it also has a potential for eroding trust, right? So there's a lot for leaders to have to navigate through. And if our response is only to tell leaders to be more resilient or agile, We may unintentionally add weight to people who are not ready to carry that much weight. That's a lot. That's overwhelming. So, regenerative leadership offers a different response. So, it gives leaders a way to step back and look at the conditions around the leader. Instead of placing all the emphasis on an individual person, it looks at the whole of the organization and the system and the way in which people are interacting and working. It's not asking leaders to care less about performance, it's asking them to lead in a way that makes future performance more possible.
Okay. So let's bring this back to HR, L&D, OD, and leadership development leaders. What is their role in all of this?
Well, it's significant because they're the ones who see the strain before it becomes visible in the numbers, right? They hear the leader fatigue, they see the cultural friction through, employee complaints. They notice when the teams are struck, and they know where the silos are becoming stronger and communication is breaking down, right? And when people are resistant to change, and that gives them a very important vantage point, that can help the organization. And that's where regenerative leadership becomes a useful development frame. And it gives them a way to ask whether they're developing leaders only to perform as individuals or whether they're helping them also build capacity across the system. So we go back to that systems thinking.
I know. It's almost like it's a trend.
God, I hope so.
That feels like a very different leadership development agenda, right?
Yeah, it means leadership can not only be about skill transfer, it has to be more connected to the real work and the things that we're doing every day. And that's where learning and organizational development can come together in a very powerful way. So learning brings development, practice, reflection, and capability building. And the OD brings systems thinking, facilitation, diagnosis, culture, and change. So when those disciplines come together, leadership development becomes more than a program. It becomes a way to help the organization renew and strengthen itself, I think.
So if week 1 helped define regenerative leadership, what is the main message here on week 2?
Is that regenerative leadership matters now because many of our old leadership assumptions are being so tested with the complexity in our world today. But the complexity leaders are facing now really can't be carried by one individual competent person alone. And if we keep developing leaders as if they're the only source of clarity and energy and accountability, we're unintentionally reinforcing the very depletion that we're trying to solve. So this gives us a wider framework, and it helps us look at leadership as something that lives not only in a person, but in the relationships and practices and decisions and conditions of the system. So instead of asking, how do I become a better leader? The bigger question is, how do we build a stronger leadership system?
And that feels like an important distinction, right? The leader and the leadership system.
It is because many leaders are trying to do good work inside systems that weren't designed for the level of complexity they're facing now. So this isn't about telling leaders to try harder, Dario. It's about helping leaders and organizations work differently. And so I think for HR, learning and development, and organizational development leaders, this is a real opportunity to expand the leadership conversation beyond individual skills and into the conditions that allow leadership capacity to grow across the organization.
Well, Susan, honestly, I really think that was a great place to close. And it really sets us up for our final episode well. Next week, we're going to be talking about regenerative leadership in practice, right? We're learning OD, coaching, and real business challenges come together. And we'll also be joined by Dr. Nancy Zentis, Susan's partner in developing this work. So we're excited for that. And Susan, thank you.
My pleasure, Dario. Thank you.
And thank you all the listeners for tuning in. Until next time.